My name is Abby Mitchell. I'm 32 now, but this story begins 7 years ago when I was still naive enough to believe in happy endings. Back then, I lived in a small apartment with my fiance, Jason Reynolds. We'd been together since college, 5 years of building what I thought was an unshakable foundation for our future. Jason was tall with dark hair and the kind of smile that made everyone like him instantly. He worked as a financial advisor at a local firm, and I was just starting my career in marketing. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. Or so I thought. My family consisted of my parents, Robert and Linda Mitchell, and my younger sister, Olivia. She's 3 years younger than me and has been the apple of my parents' eye since the day she was born. Growing up, it was always Olivia this and Olivia that. They attended all her recitals and games but somehow always had an excuse when it came to my events. I'd gotten used to it, though it still stung sometimes. When Jason proposed to me on our 5th anniversary, I was over the moon. We'd discussed marriage before, but the actual proposal still caught me by surprise. That night, I called my parents to share the news. "Mom, Jason proposed, we're getting married." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That's wonderful, honey," my mother finally said, her voice oddly flat. "We should all get together to celebrate." I was surprised by her lack of enthusiasm, but chalked it up to her being tired. My sister's reaction was even stranger when I called her. "Oh, well," Olivia said, "congratulations, I guess." "Thanks," I replied, confused by her tone. "I hope you'll be my maid of honor?" "Of course," she answered quickly, "wouldn't miss it for the world." Jason and I decided on a small wedding. We wanted only close friends and family, about 50 people total. We figured we'd save money that way and put it toward a down payment on a house instead. But when we met with our parents to discuss the plans, we got a shock. "We'd like to pay for half of the wedding," Jason's mom said, smiling warmly. "And we'll cover the other half," my father added. I nearly choked on my coffee. My parents had never offered to pay for anything significant in my life before. College? I took out loans. First car? Saved up myself. But now they wanted to foot the bill for half my wedding? "Are you sure?" I asked, looking at them suspiciously. "Of course we're sure," my mother said, patting my hand. "It's your big day, Abby." I should have seen the red flags then. The way my mother avoided eye contact. The strange smile on my father's face. But I was so thrilled by their unexpected generosity that I chose to ignore it all. With the budget no longer a concern, I decided to splurge on my dress. I found it at a boutique downtown, a gorgeous A-line gown with delicate lace sleeves and a train that seemed to go on forever. It cost more than I'd ever spent on anything, but the moment I tried it on, I knew it was the one. I drove to my parents' house, with my dress carefully laid out in the back seat of my car. When I walked into the living room, Olivia was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up when I entered. "Hey, Liv," I said, "I brought my wedding dress to show you guys." She glanced up, her expression bored. "Great." I tried not to let her attitude dampen my spirits as I carefully unzipped the garment bag and pulled out the dress. My mother gasped. "Oh, Abby, it's gorgeous." I held it up against me, beaming. "Isn't it perfect?" I fell in love with it the moment I saw it. Olivia's face turned an odd shade of green. "Must be nice to have Mom and Dad paying for everything," she muttered. "They're only paying for half," I corrected her. "Jason's parents are covering the rest." "Whatever," she snapped, grabbing her phone and storming out of the room. My mother sighed. "Don't mind her, she's just jealous." "I'm used to it," I replied, carefully putting the dress back in its bag. And I was. Olivia had always envied anything I had, always tried to one-up me. When I got A's in school, she'd work herself to exhaustion to get A+S. When I started dating Jason, she suddenly needed to date the captain of the football team. Over the next few weeks, my mother threw herself into the wedding preparations with an enthusiasm that surprised me. She called me multiple times a day to discuss flower arrangements, seating charts, menu options, and a million other details I hadn't even considered. As the wedding date approached, I noticed Jason acting strangely. He'd become distant, often staring into space when I was talking to him. When I asked if everything was okay, he'd smile and say he was just thinking about work or the wedding. A week before the wedding, my mother invited us over for dinner. Jason seemed unusually nervous as we drove to my parents' house. "Are you okay?" I asked, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "Fine," he replied tersely, pulling his hand away to adjust the radio. When we arrived, Olivia was already there, wearing a dress that seemed too fancy for a simple family dinner. She hugged Jason a little too long when greeting him, and I noticed him stiffen slightly before hugging her back. Dinner was tense. My father kept clearing his throat awkwardly. My mother's smile seemed fixed and unnatural. Olivia kept stealing glances at Jason, who was pushing food around his plate without eating much. I excused myself to use the bathroom, hoping a moment alone would help me shake off the strange feeling that had settled over me. When I came back, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Olivia had taken my seat next to Jason. Their heads were bent close together, and she was laughing at something he'd said. My mother was watching them with an odd expression that looked almost satisfied. "What's going on?" I asked, standing at the edge of the dining room. Everyone's head snapped up. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Olivia smiled, a smug, triumphant smile that made my stomach clench. "I think it's time we told her, don't you?" she said, looking at Jason. "Told me what?" I demanded, my voice shaking slightly. Olivia reached over and placed her hand on Jason's arm. "Jason and I have been seeing each other for 6 months now," she announced, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "He loves me, not you." I looked at Jason, waiting for him to laugh, to tell her she was crazy. But he just stared at his plate. "Is this true?" I asked him. He finally looked up, his face pale. "I'm sorry, Abby, I didn't mean for it to happen." The room started spinning. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. "So you all decided to ambush me at dinner?" I looked around the table. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. My mother's face was unnaturally calm. "The wedding is off." "The wedding isn't cancelled," my mother said suddenly. "We've paid for everything. Olivia will simply take your place." The words hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. "Are you insane?" I finally managed to say. "You can't just replace me at my own wedding." "It's not your wedding anymore," Olivia said, smirking, "it's mine." I turned to my father, desperate for someone to be on my side. "Dad?" He cleared his throat. "Your mother's right, Abby. Jason's parents, and we have already paid for everything. It would be a waste to cancel now." "I don't give a damn about the money," I shouted, my hands balling into fists. I wanted to lunge across the table and wipe that smug smile off Olivia's face. "This is my wedding." "I'm sorry, Abby," Jason said weakly. "Did you all know about this?" I asked, the horrible realization dawning on me. "Is that why you offered to pay for the wedding, Mom? You were planning this all along, weren't you?" My mother hesitated just a second too long before answering, "Of course not." That slight pause told me everything. "Why did you wait until a week before the wedding to tell me?" I asked, my voice breaking. Jason remained silent, but Olivia had no such reservations. "Jason was too much of a coward to tell you himself," she said with a shrug. I had to take matters into my own hands. I backed away from the table, feeling sick. "I'm leaving." "Don't forget to leave your wedding dress," Olivia called after me, her voice light and casual. "I'll need it now." I ran out of the house without answering, tears blinding me as I fumbled with my car keys. I drove back to the apartment I shared with Jason, the apartment I now had to leave, because the lease was in his name. When I got there, I didn't cry. I was too angry to cry. I grabbed my suitcases and started throwing my clothes into them. Then I saw the wedding dress hanging on the closet door. Without hesitation, I took a pair of scissors and began cutting it into pieces. Snip, snip, snip. Each cut felt like revenge. I left the scraps scattered across the bed we'd shared. I called my best friend, Kate, who lived across town. "Can I stay with you for a while?" I asked when she answered. "Of course," she said. "What's wrong? You sound terrible." "I'll explain when I get there," I said, my voice hollow. "It's over, the wedding's off." I spent the night on her couch, crying until I had no tears left. Kate sat with me, holding my hand, bringing me tissues and cups of tea I didn't drink. "What are you going to do now?" she asked as morning light filtered through her blinds. "I need to email everyone invited to the wedding," I said, my voice raspy from crying. "Tell them it's off." I sent out a mass email with shaking hands. "Due to unforeseen circumstances, the wedding between Jason Reynolds and myself will not be taking place. I apologize for any inconvenience." The responses started coming in immediately. Friends expressed shock and sympathy. "What happened?" they asked. "Are you okay?" I couldn't bear to explain it over and over. But then came the messages from relatives. "Your mother called us, she said the wedding is still on, but Olivia is the bride now? What's going on, Abby?" I turned off my phone, unable to deal with it all. At work, I went straight to my boss's office. Tom had always been kind to me, more like a mentor than a boss. When I walked in, he looked up from his computer and his expression changed immediately. "Abby, what's wrong?" I told him everything, the words pouring out of me in a rush. When I finished, his face was thunderous. "Those people don't deserve you," he said firmly. And I might have a solution. He explained that our company was opening a new branch office in another state. They needed someone experienced to help get things up and running. "The position comes with a relocation package and a significant raise," he said. "It's yours if you want it." I didn't hesitate. "When can I start?" "How about next week?" The day before Olivia and Jason's wedding, I was on a plane heading across the country. The company had arranged a furnished apartment for me, and I arrived with nothing but my clothes and personal items. I threw myself into my new job, working longer hours than required, taking on extra projects. My boss noticed and was impressed. 6 months later, I got my first promotion. A year after that, another. My salary increased with each step up the corporate ladder. 3 years after moving, I had saved enough for a down payment on my own apartment. The mortgage payments were high, but my salary could handle it. For the first time in my life, I owned something substantial. Something that was entirely mine. My Aunt Meredith, my mother's sister, was the only family member I stayed in contact with. She called monthly and sometimes visited. She never mentioned my parents unless I asked, and I rarely did. One day, during one of her visits, she brought news I hadn't asked for. "Olivia had another baby," she said hesitantly. "That makes 3 now." "Good for her," I replied flatly. "She doesn't work," Aunt Meredith continued. "Your parents took out business loans for Jason." I nodded, sipping my coffee. "How nice of them." Aunt Meredith studied my face. "You really don't care, do you?" "No," I said simply, "I don't." The truth was, I felt nothing when I heard about them. No anger, no satisfaction, no regret. They had become strangers to me, characters in a story I'd read long ago and mostly forgotten. 7 years passed. I paid off my mortgage early, due to several substantial bonuses. I had a good life, friends, a career I loved, financial security, and most importantly, freedom. I had finally found peace. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Hello?" There was a pause, and then, "Abby, it's your mother. Please don't hang up, I know I have no right to call you. I know what we did was unforgivable. But please, just listen." I said nothing, letting the silence stretch between us. In the background, I could hear what sounded like a child crying. "Things are bad, Abby, she continued when I didn't respond, really bad. Jason's business failed completely. The loans your father and I took out for him, we can't pay them back. The bank is threatening foreclosure on our house. I let out a bitter laugh, and this concerns me how, exactly? Olivia and Jason lost their house 6 months ago, she went on, ignoring my question. They've been living with us since then, with all 3 children. Olivia doesn't work, you know. She never has. And now Jason can't find a job anywhere in town because his reputation is ruined after the business failed. I'm still waiting to hear why you're telling me all this, I said flatly, though I already knew what was coming. She took a deep breath. We need help, Abby, financial help. I'm working double shifts at the hospital now, and your father came out of retirement to work at the hardware store, but it's not enough. We can barely keep the lights on, and with 3 small children in the house. I was about to hang up, to tell her exactly where she could go with her problems, when suddenly an idea formed in my mind. A wicked, perfect idea. Actually, I said slowly, I might be willing to help, on one condition. Thanksgiving is coming up in 3 weeks. I'll come back to town, and you'll host a big family dinner. Invite all the relatives, Aunt Meredith, Uncle Paul, Grandma Mitchell, all the cousins. We'll have a proper family reunion. Of course, she said eagerly, we'd love that. I'll invite everyone. You don't know what this means to. I hung up before she could finish. Setting my phone down, I leaned back in my office chair and stared out the window at the skyline of my adopted city. A slow smile spread across my face. After 7 years, I was finally going to get closure. And revenge. I spent the next 3 weeks meticulously planning my trip. The hotel was just as nice as the website had promised. After checking in, I took a long bath, ordered room service, and got a good night's sleep. The next day, Thanksgiving Day, I took my time getting ready. I didn't want to arrive too early. Better to make an entrance when most of the relatives were already there. At precisely 4 p.m., I pulled up in front of my parents' house. The place looked shabby compared to my memories. The paint was peeling around the windows, the front steps sagged slightly, and the yard, once my father's pride and joy, was overgrown and neglected. I sat in the car for a moment, steeling myself for what was to come. Then I grabbed the small purse containing my surprise and walked to the door. My mother answered on the first knock. Her face lit up with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Abby, you came, she moved as if to hug me, but I stepped past her into the house, avoiding the contact. I said I would, I replied coolly. The inside of the house wasn't much better than the outside. The furniture was the same as I remembered, but shabbier, worn. Toys were scattered across the living room floor, and I could hear children's voices coming from somewhere deeper in the house. My mother led me through to the kitchen, where Olivia was setting the table. She looked up as I entered, and I saw the flash of envy in her eyes as she took in my appearance, my clothes, my obvious success. She'd gained weight since I'd last seen her, and there were dark circles under her eyes. Her clothes were cheap and slightly out of style. Hello, Olivia, I said, my voice perfectly pleasant, you look tired. Before she could respond, 3 small children burst into the kitchen, followed by a harried-looking man I barely recognized as Jason. He'd aged badly, his hairline had receded, and he'd developed a paunch. When he saw me, he froze like a deer in headlights. An awkward silence fell over the kitchen. My father entered from the back door, looking older and more stooped than I remembered. When he saw me, he gave a tentative smile. Abby, you made it. I did, I said, maintaining my pleasant tone. You all seem busy. Should I come back later? No, my mother said quickly, everything's under control. The turkey's almost done, and the relatives should be arriving any minute. Why don't you go sit in the living room? I'll bring you a drink. I nodded and headed for the living room, aware of the whispered conversation that started the moment I was out of sight. I'd barely sat down when the doorbell rang, announcing the arrival of the first relatives. Over the next half hour, the house filled with family members, some I hadn't seen in years, others I'd kept in touch with through Aunt Meredith. Finally, dinner was served. Throughout the meal, my mother kept steering the conversation toward me, my job, my life in the city. I answered politely but briefly, giving away as little as possible. I could see the growing frustration on Olivia's face as the attention remained focused on me, rather than her or her children. When it was time for dessert, a store-bought pumpkin pie, my mother gave me a meaningful look. "Abby, perhaps you'd like to say something before we serve the pie?" This was it. The moment she'd been waiting for. The moment I'd been waiting for. I stood up, smoothing my dress, and looked around the table. All eyes were on me, some curious, some expectant. My parents and Olivia were smiling, probably anticipating my announcement of financial support, maybe even thinking I'd decided to forgive and forget. They couldn't have been more wrong. "I'd like to thank everyone for coming today," I began, my voice steady and clear. "It's been a long time since I've been back in this house, and there's a reason for that. A reason I think some of you know, but others may not." My mother's smile began to fade, uncertainty creeping into her expression. 7 years ago, I was supposed to get married. I had a beautiful dress, a venue booked, invitations sent out. My parents had generously offered to pay for half the wedding, something that surprised me at the time, given that they'd never shown much interest in supporting me before. I looked directly at my mother as I spoke, watching her face grow pale. A week before the wedding, I discovered the truth. My fiance, Jason, had been having an affair with my sister, Olivia. But that wasn't the worst part. "Abby," my mother interrupted, her voice tight with warning. "This isn't the time or place." "This is exactly the time and place," I countered smoothly. I turned back to the table of relatives, many of whom were looking increasingly uncomfortable. My parents knew about the affair. In fact, they had planned all along for Olivia to take my place at the wedding. They didn't tell me until a week before, when they ambushed me at a family dinner much like this one, informing me that the wedding would still take place, just with my sister as the bride instead of me. Gasps and murmurs rippled around the table. Aunt Meredith, who already knew the story, reached over and squeezed my hand in support. "When I said I was canceling the wedding," I continued, "my mother informed me that I had no right to do so, as they had paid for it. As I left that night, Olivia called after me, asking me to leave my wedding dress for her, since I wouldn't be needing it anymore. I went home, cut that dress into pieces, packed my things, and left town the next day. I haven't spoken to any of them since." The silence around the table was deafening. My father was staring at his plate. Jason looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. My mother's face was a mask of controlled panic. "Until 3 weeks ago," I went on, when my mother called me out of the blue. "It seems that Jason's business venture, funded by loans from my parents, has failed spectacularly. They're about to lose their house. Olivia, Jason, and their 3 children are living here because they've already lost theirs. And now, after 7 years of silence, they've reached out to me for financial help." I reached into my purse and pulled out a small envelope. Opening it, I removed 5 crisp $100 bills and placed them on the table. "This is what you deserve," I said, looking each of them in the eye. $500. Not because you need it, but because I want you to understand exactly how little your betrayal means to me now. I could give you more, much more, but that would imply that I care, and I don't. Not anymore." I turned to address the other relatives at the table. "I apologize to all of you for ruining Thanksgiving dinner. That wasn't my intention. But I couldn't let them continue this charade, pretending we're one big happy family when the truth is, they discarded me the moment it was convenient." As I walked toward the door, I heard chairs scraping behind me. Aunt Meredith was the first to follow, then Uncle Paul, then my cousins Mark and Sarah. By the time I reached the front door, more than half the table had abandoned their meals. I slept better that night than I had in years. In the morning, I checked out early and drove to the airport, leaving my hometown behind once more, this time knowing I would never return. A week after I returned home, Aunt Meredith called. "Well, you certainly left an impression," she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. "How bad is it?" I asked, not sure if I really cared. "Pretty bad," she admitted. "No one is speaking to your parents. Your mother tried to call cousin Jennifer yesterday to borrow some money, and Jennifer hung up on her." "That's not my problem," I replied. "Your father says they might have to declare bankruptcy," she continued. "They spent all their retirement savings trying to keep Jason's business afloat." "Still not my problem," I said firmly. "I know," she sighed, "I just thought you should know. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. They needed to face the consequences of their actions." 2 months later, I received a Christmas card from my mother. Inside was a long, rambling letter about how sorry she was, how much she missed me, how they were struggling to keep their house. I tore it up without finishing it and dropped the pieces into the trash. Some wounds never fully heal. Some betrayals cut too deep to be forgiven. But I've learned something important in the 7 years since my life fell apart. Sometimes the family you choose is far better than the one you're born into.